Excellent. Hello. I just thought I'd do a quick update. It's Stu again. Just do a quick update on the fundraising activities just before Ed Tucker's talk, which Mike will introduce. So just to give you some updates, we are doing really well. We've just reached £7,051, which is phenomenal. So we're pretty much almost 3/4 the way through our fundraising goal, but we want to push past that if we can. So if you can donate, the mods will be on Twitch. We'll be dropping in the GoFundMe link. Is on Twitter as well. It's everywhere. If you can donate anything for MSF, it's going to be awesome. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's donated anything so far, whether it's £5 or 50 or 100 or 500, whatever it is, it's absolutely appreciated. And you guys are superb superstars. That's all I wanted to say. Bob Geldof bit done. Over to Mike to kick this off, and I'm just going to sit here and be quiet. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stu. Can't echo everything that Stu said is enough. Give money. If you got £5, give £5. You got £1,000, give it. Right, great, super awesome. Here comes Ed Tucker. Ed's a great mate. Super involved in the InfoSec community. Highly regarded. Very, very deep knowledge of the thing, right the way from grassroots security right the way up to the CISO level. Over to you, Ed.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. And just to kind of echo on is donate what you can. I'm unemployed now, and I'll be donating as soon as I've finished here. So just a quick one. I'm going to kind of take you through what I call joining the dots to cybersecurity. So let's draw the picture to the unicorn and see what we can achieve. Firstly, who am I? So I'm a defender, hence I suppose blue team, for many years in UK government, the taxman of all people, so positively despised by everyone. then a consultant, and then a vendor. So defender turned vendor, and now unemployed. So I'm not trying to sell you anything, so don't worry on that front. Won a bunch of awards, which was really nice. Generally just know a bunch of people, like the subject matter, like drinking, get along with people. And I've just got a few bits of my experience to spare with you and just see where we get to and if there's anything to learn from that. So basically, kind of say what you see. There's a common problem that I see in cybersecurity and the industry today. Something that holds many organizations back in their maturity, their ability to grow, learn, and develop into a more effective organization. Certainly when it comes to defense, and I talk about defense as everything kind of on the internal side. So I'm not just talking about analysts in a SOC and things like that. That's, blue team for me goes way beyond that. It's the whole organization and everything they do, the whole culture and every piece that sits with it. There are many, many more than a singular problem to tackle. But for me, there's a pivotal piece that I'm going to focus on in particular that really drives, I think, a wedge or a blocker, or is a real hamper to stopping people realizing their potential when it comes to blue team or comes to securing the organization. And it goes way beyond just being able to say kind of, we take your security seriously. This is about actually doing it. Quite simply for me, too many organizations, and this is, from having been there and done it and also spoken to my peer groups, and I'm sure most of us would actually, if we looked in the mirror harshly, would own up to it as well. Treat our initiatives, our solutions, our activities in isolation. By that, what I mean is that we don't really give true cognizance, we don't understand, or we choose to ignore the linkage between each initiative and the overall goals, and other pathways to defining and achieving that goal. So what I mean there is kind of, we've got dislocated security teams running dislocated initiatives and wonder why we're not progressing at the pace that we should. Within that as well, it's kind of when we look at our initiatives, when we look at our activities, we're not always conversant or understanding all the different pieces of the puzzle that make an effective outcome. You might disagree. You might not think this is something you do. However, if we just take it at a base level and run through what I think is a very straightforward example, and we'll see where people sit. So let's start with security education and awareness. This is something that was a bugbear of mine when I was at HMRC. It's something that I went and did as a vendor as well. And I want to speak about that from an example of why I think, as an industry generally, it's an example of how we don't see the dots, we don't join the dots together, and how we can use it to start to build out this theme and this changing mentality to actually understand greater what we need to do to achieve greater outcomes and greater goals. So awareness, how many people have a requirement to run a security awareness program? That'll be absolutely everyone. They might include phishing simulations. They might do once a year, 30 minutes of death by PowerPoint because they need to tick the PCI DSS box. Whatever it happens to be, it's a requirement for everyone. However, when many of those run through the process of defining the overall goal and the various links and dependencies to make that happen, do they actually run through that? Far too often I hear security experts or organizations, when they're talking about awareness, that their overall goal is to raise awareness. And awareness in their organization, or maybe measure preparedness, when neither really has any meaning in terms of an actual goal. So awareness is not a goal. Awareness in itself gets you little unless you understand the linkage. I'm just going to digress slightly, because for me, it feels like as an industry itself that we're actually, it's designed to push us into a siloed mentality. It's designed to push us into taking things in isolation and not seeing the bigger picture. Whether it's quadrants, waves, or insights, it's all looking at isolated components. And at no point do you actually see where's the join, where's the linkage, where's the cognizance of people and process, where's the dependencies, where's the aspects that are outside of our locus of control. Every technology in the world is absolutely useless unless you have people and process to feed, water it, keep it up to date, to effectively use it to its fullest capability and get beyond using just 5% of what we paid for and actually making the best use of it. So let's just go back to awareness while we're thinking this and thinking of quadrants and silos. Let's take a trip into the approach of the adversary. So the adversary that we're looking at here, let's take it as a simple that we're going to look at those who use phishing emails, whatever it happens to be. Quite often we say you need to think in the mind, think like an adversary. In this case, it works purely to prove a point. So how preposterous do you think it would be if adversaries worked in the way that we do when it comes to security, with siloed initiatives that seldom join up? There'd be a lot less of a threat, that's for sure. But think about it. So would an adversary look up slightly less evil Gartner for the latest insight into what they should do? What initiative is in the top right? What's a leader? Would they send phishing emails and then maybe realize a year or two later that an exploit included with the phishing email would take them to the next level of maturity? Alternatively, would they be a tad more joined up than that in pinning stages or initiative to an overall strategic outcome and goal? So you think about adversaries are mission orientated. So should we be. So long as we can define the actual desired outcome rather than some near-sighted siloed goal. So awareness isn't the goal that we want to achieve. So would an adversary only send a phishing email without ever considering what happens next? Well, no, it would frankly be utterly ridiculous to even come up with that concept. Yet think how we as defenders approach our controls or initiatives. So are we as joined up as the adversary? Are we joined up at all? And if we're not joined up, why not? So I'm not just thinking about kind of the analyst angle when it comes to obviously your Gartners, your Forresters, your whoever, I don't really care. But also think about the differing touch points that the industry offers to us, whether it's conferences and the majority of speakers, our expert insights, our various webinar series, and how much is driven by a singular viewpoint and a mentality. You know, that there's this super sophisticated emerging threat, vulnerability, adversary, whatever it happens to be, and I just happen to offer the very cyber widget that combats it. I'm not going to sell it directly to you in any of these things, but I'm going to skirt around it so that you know my technology is the one to buy. And it is basically a technology and sales focused, or rather siloed focused approach. Thought leadership, or really is it sales thought? And I don't in any way blame salespeople for trying to sell, but I do blame an industry that places that at the top, where money is more important than the actual security and the achievable or the goals that we want to actually get to. There's nothing new or ever likely to change in that, but it's just got to be recognized as to why we kind of have this mentality in the way we approach what we do. Which all leads us kind of into this silo or the funnel to ensure that the focus is on the product, the solution, the silo itself. But we've done that for years. We've done it for years and years and years and years and years, and a focus on technology and a focus on siloed initiatives and a focus on things like doing awareness, because awareness is a thing that we have to do. And it's not really got us anywhere. I don't know about you, but for me, it doesn't feel like the world of security is particularly in a better place than it was, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. We're still carrying massive legacy. We're still carrying an incredible debt. We've still got controls that we have no idea whether they work or not or effective. We're still poor at risk management. We still look to the simple things, the things we're driven to, which is siloed initiatives, technology specifics, rather than actually looking at how we address things across the whole and understand how almost the domino effect of activities actually work together to achieve an outcome. And if you remove one of the dominoes, then you're likely to fail halfway. Because what we're doing is we're missing the web. And I don't mean the internet, I'm talking about the web of interconnectivity that runs throughout everything we do and want to achieve. So one of the biggest changes I think we can make as an industry or as a discipline is to really alter how we approach the things and recognize linkage and realize that everything we do is linked, and focus upon effectively one junction on a spider's web that leads down different pathways. So nothing itself is isolated. There's always knock-on effects, there's always dependencies, there's always people, there's processes, there's teams, there's goals, and of course there's gaps. And the more we recognize how things bleed into each other, the more we'll actually design actions with links in mind, and it'll enable us to affect better change. Rather than masking a problem or moving it along one or ticking a box, it will also build a greater cognizance of the things around our little world that impact our effectiveness. Things that we don't directly control, but can influence if we understand them better. So kind of with that little tangential run onto the side as to why I think we think in a particular way, I want to come back to that little issue of awareness. where we started kind of right off the bat. So you raise awareness. That's your goal. You've set that as standard, and you do it through whatever mechanisms you do. As we said, maybe once a year, mandatory security awareness training that sits along your side, your health and safety, and all the other bits that they have to do to tick boxes. Or you do it properly. You know, you use every mechanism possible to get a touch point with your users, to drive an awareness campaign that's predicated on personal cyber security, using every mechanism possible to build an aware workforce. Fab. Absolutely great. You might even kind of use those mechanisms and perpetually continue to drive kind of goals and champions and every possible way that drives that awareness, and go beyond kind of bloody PCI DSS that said you had to run it at least once a year, and everyone took that as a bare minimum, did just that. But that awareness, what does it actually get you? So your business colleagues are cyber aware, which means what exactly? If you set a goal of awareness and you want your people to be aware, they are now aware. And what? So maybe in one aspect, they're more likely to spot a phishing email. Whoopee-doo. And do what? Do what with it? What have you trained them to do in terms of that awareness? You taught them to delete it, in which case you've taught them that essentially they're masters of their own risk and risk for the organization, and everything will happen at the user layer, and you from a risk management perspective will be blissfully unaware. But you can see even just a very simple step there, that awareness kind of leads into the necessity to undertake an action. And let's not pretend awareness is going to hit 100% of the people 100% of the time, and they'll always make the right decisions along the way. But even there, let's just kind of think about that. So let's factor in the fact that the majority of email-borne threats, because it's a nice, easy example to go through, are generic. They're mass distributed, which generally means that in all likelihood, you're going to have more than one recipient in your organization. So let's say, for example, there are 10. You've got 10 recipients of a particular email-borne threat that are in your organization. That's landed in the inbox. Super. It's got past the controls, because things always will. That's just the way it is. Deal with it. So now these 10 people all need to make the same positive decision to delete the suspicious email for your awareness to have had a success, for you to have actually achieved a successful outcome when it really matters, which is when the actual potential threat lands in the inbox, or it manifests itself to that end user. And how confident are you that all 10 of them are going to make the same decision and actually enact that decision and therefore achieve that success? So then, even if we look at that from there, we also have to acknowledge that this happens to happen every single time. So even then, as I said, the security team, the risk team are blissfully unaware, as are your risk management regime, that this is all done at the user level. It's all done at the inbox level. It never actually flies at all in front of anyone that needs to assess it from a risk. This is a risk potentially manifesting up until the point of potential impact or exploit within the organization itself, or being dealt with, and therefore one of your controls, the human and awareness, actually working, and your risk management is blissfully unaware that that happened, and therefore you don't know to measure the effectiveness of that control. So, of course, what if the user was to report the suspicious email? Would that be better? Well, yeah, of course it would. But then from that awareness, of course, we need to understand that that user then needs to report it. They need to then understand how to report it. And then maybe we could take an action before some of the 9 remaining recipients have to make their decision, which sounds great, absolutely sounds great. And it sounds like the type of thing that we should do. But as I said, firstly, we need to think about how are they going to report it and to whom? Will your analysts need to talk your end users through the mechanisms of forwarding the suspicious email as an attachment so that they can investigate it? Believe me, it's something that has to happen. And believe me, it is easier said than done. Even just the simple thing of phoning up a user and saying you're from security, you can almost feel the clench, the tension in the air before you even start to have a conversation about what's needed. So that user wants to report it, and we need to get a copy of the attachments. So how will we find out if there are any other recipients? Do you have access to the mail server? as a really simple one? Or is that run by another team outside of security, maybe even a supplier? And do you have processes in place to engage and prioritize their work? So without even trying, and at the very basic start of this journey, we've gone from awareness being an initiative, being a goal, to already leading outside of security and to dependencies and processes with other teams. Other teams will have competing priorities because, funnily enough, the exchange team's primary focus isn't security. It's generally keeping exchange from falling over, making sure it's kept up to date, making sure it's working well, and making sure any changes are put through in line with change management. But now think about this for every single step of the investigation. And the overhead as well that you've just placed onto your security operations by moving the awareness action just from delete to report. Now, of course, reporting is far better than deleting, but it comes with a cost. It comes with a significant overhead. Moreover, this is just the investigation. This is just firstly reporting, which understand that every time you report something, you've generated work for another team within your organization. But you also need to take meaningful mitigating action. Otherwise, what's the point? You may as well go back to the user just deleting and hope that that works every time. So, simple thing, can you purge a suspicious email from all mailboxes? Does it require an email administration team? Is that a supplier again? Does it involve change controls? Believe me, in some places it actually does, which sounds bonkers because it's a response in a sense to a potential threat. But in some places, contracts are written that you need a change control in place. Do you have authority as security to actually do it? And how quickly can it be done? And can it be undone if you've made a mistake? And again, without even thinking and without actually going into any depths here whatsoever, we've already got links from awareness into security operations, into IT operations, and possibly other processes, things like ITIL, as I say, from change management. You'll certainly have service management in there. You'll need preordained authority. Without even thinking now, we're straight away bleeding from one discipline into another when all we wanted to do was raise awareness. But to actually be effective in what we want to do, of having our people aware, making them able to spot things that are potential threats that might manifest, even as simple as just in the inbox, just focusing on that alone. We need then for those users to be able to report it. We need them to know who to report it to. We need an easy mechanism for them to do it. We need them to report it to the security people who need to be aware that this overhead and be ready for this overhead that's going to come their way. They will need to undertake an investigation that will potentially involve different data sets, different technologies, and potentially different teams. And then off the back of that, make a decision and enact something as a result of it. And straight away, one simple bit of awareness about a phishing email has gone right across an organization into all sorts of different areas. But if we do that, then we're starting to look at a successful outcome. That maybe if we report things, one will be more aware from a risk perspective because something has got through our controls and landed in the inbox. We'll be able maybe to actually get there before those other users need to make a decision. And we can show the effectiveness of our process controls, that actually our response is potentially quicker than our users. But of course, there's always a danger because there's plenty of dwell time in there that our users are going to be quicker than us. And hopefully they'll make the right decision and report it as well. But generally means that you've got 2 tickets for the same thing and you'll have to investigate those. But without thinking, as I said, you've already started to build a spider's web just by looking at what happens next. So saying, so what? What happens when one of these things occurs, and what would we like it to happen? What do we want it to look like when it comes to making successful interventions across the organization so that we can actually have a meaningful impact when it comes to risk reduction and response to threats? So that overhead already is quite a cost, and it's the cost you pay for your security operations team. For your security operations team now working more hand in hand with your awareness team. Now, if you do security awareness and you don't involve your security operations team, then you really should. How are you going to make them aware of the latest threats that really could manifest if your security operations team are not working with you to help you understand what threats may manifest to those users? or what actions to take, how to drive those actions, how to enact them, how to do something which is bound to involve the operations team. How do I get in touch with them? How do I log calls with them? How simple is it be? How do I start to engage on a human level between these different teams? How do I get my security teams to work together? Which, it may seem ridiculous that two security teams don't work together, but it's really, really common. It's ridiculously common to see awareness and operations not work hand in hand. It sounds bonkers. It sounds like one of the most obvious things going, but it happens all the time. And sometimes you've just got to break through those barriers and make it happen yourself, to make sure that actually, if you're in awareness and you don't work with operations, go and meet them, go and investigate, go and join with them, just to understand what type of stuff you can let your users know about, and vice versa. But then when we look at that investigative process of what we might need to go through, we can then look at it and kind of see that in terms of that, once that user hits, that report action and it comes to security, to operations, to do something meaningful, we can then look at all the different steps they have to go through to understand, well, what is it they need to do to undertake an investigation and undertake a meaningful action and undertake potential, different actions depending on how this threat potentially manifests and the actions of the user at the other end, which may spiral down into different parts of the spider's web, and then start to see how effective are those pieces. You'll get phishing emails, you'll get rogue emails, malicious emails, spam, whatever it happens to be that's reported to you. How good are you at actually enacting that investigation? How good are you at making meaningful decisions? How good are you at getting the facts really quickly? And then how good are you at taking the action, the remedial action, to protect the organization? And of course, are there pieces in there that you can make slicker? Is there a process aspect in there that you can make slicker? Is it possible to automate some of it? Is it possible to use some kind of rules to help you understand some of that? Can you use some of the native APIs available to you, like 365, there's a native search API. Can you make use of this to make some of the investigation better for you? And yes, you can, frankly. For a simple thing like an email-borne threat, there are some obvious tasks that any investigation will complete. First of which, you need a copy of it. You certainly want the headers. You'll want any attachments and understand those. You want any links and understand where they're going. You want to discover if there's any other recipients or any variants, because let's face it, things like sender, subject, and that are going to change. Do you need a human analyst to undertake some of these acts? Do you want things like the sender IP address, and do you want to do reputation lookups on it? Do you want to do who is information from those registrars that understand the GDPR a little bit better than others and will actually give you information back? How much of that can you actually use technology or aspire to use technology to ensure that your dwell time gets reduced as you undertake these investigations, because you've added a greater overhead to your security operations by making your users more aware and asking them to report things? And you see already then we're starting to look at process optimization, maybe automation. Well, hang on, and maybe we've got a strategy about automation somewhere. But what maybe we can't do today, we could aspire to use technology to do tomorrow for repeatable tasks. So when it comes to things like the links, or when it comes to attachments, as I say, the IP address lookups, any spam list checks, any DMARC checks, simple things that maybe we can actually just do in an automated fashion, so that when that user spots something, because they're far more aware, they undertake the reporting action, that as they undertake that reporting action, or very soon after, we start to present the analyst with as much information as possible to help the investigation and get us closer to decision making and remediation as quickly as possible. And look at those and see, can we make those slicker as well, and how can we make it better? There's quite a lot in an investigation such as this. You could potentially use technology to reduce the analyst overhead, so that you can present them with those results and the decision making. But it does require thought, and it requires effort, and it requires collaboration. That maybe you can see, though, how we can maybe mitigate some of the overhead that we've placed because of awareness by just moving it from delete to report, and how much more of a meaningful outcome we can create if we start to follow all the different actions all the way through. The now what? The user reports it. Now what? Operations have to get hold of it. Now what? They need to investigate it. Now what? They need to remediate. Now what? And all the different pieces that make up those puzzles and those actions, because they'll all have sub actions within there. And you'll see that we break from awareness being a goal, which it isn't, and start to bleed into awareness and operations and process and people and relationships and suppliers and other teams, and then potentially where we can optimize aspects within that and all fit within the same flow, which allows us to look at a more goal-orientated structure. That the awareness when it comes to, say, phishing emails has this long horizontal trail that leads to a potentially successful outcome. And that's where we need to start to move our minds to start to make far more effective decisions across what we do as security. So when we think about kind of remediation, what we're on about there is what we want to develop confidence levels. When we talk about things like automation, we want to have confidence that this task is repeatable and make it better. And I'm not talking about machine learning. And as I said, I'm not a vendor anymore. I'm unemployed, so I'm not trying to sell you anything. But when I talk about things like automation, I mean an ability to accelerate something, to get results, get to the next action as quickly as possible, but in a way that actually you have confidence it's the right thing and presents you with the right outcome to then take that forward and make the next one. And while we're at it there, if you think about it, is there anything else we can do with the snippets of information that our investigation has covered? So we could obviously send badge URLs to firewalls and web gateways and to SIEM tools to see if anyone's clicked on them or prevent anyone from making any further access, so long as actually you've got the authority to make those changes and put blocks in space. We can send a sender IP address to the email gateways and say no more from that sender IP address, please, because it's obviously delivering bad stuff to us, whilst at least we investigate in case there's another wave of the campaign. And we're starting to get there into more active controls usage. And again, we need to consider things like ITIL. We need to consider pre-authorization. Our IT operations friends, believe me, you only need to break a live service once for it to really hamper your ability to make change a second time. And where we're requiring that, we're requiring interactions potentially with other teams. So do you have the ability to make changes to firewalls, web gateways, web proxies? Is that our good old friends in networks who we blame for literally everything that could possibly go wrong? And do we need them now to join the investigation party? Do we need them to join kind of the incident response party? Now, you might have this already in train. You might have mechanisms to engage with them. But do you also understand when they've got competing priorities? So, example, if there is a live service incident and there is a security incident, which one's going to take precedence? Because can you actually enact your security response if there's a live service incident at the same time? And what we're talking about essentially there is automation and orchestration in one sense or another. So whether people are trying to sell you SOAR or whatever it happens to be, or you've got a strategic initiative about that, if you actually start to think about what is it I want to automate and why might I want to orchestrate things, and how could that make a material impact that links all the way back to something at the start, all of a sudden we've got a far more coherent case for proving the ability, proving the need to automate, proving the need to orchestrate, and linking it back to an initial to an initiative that then has a successful outcome that saw in some form. That doesn't have to be a vendor capability. That can be you doing some form of automation and you using it to basically produce requests to make changes. That you can do that and start to prove that initiative and make it more impactful and more effective in the way that you approach potential threats and risks that can manifest in your organization. So we can go from awareness being a goal to actually awareness leading into us being able to look at process automation and process optimization and potentially orchestration and build a business case for how that could be a beneficial way to reduce overhead and reduce risk and make us far more effective with kind of proven risk metrics. And when we look at that as well, is that a lot of the information there, excuse me, a lot of the information there that we've picked up from the investigation, you could also deem as snippets, IOCs, if you want to, of potential threat intelligence that we could then share with partners. And we can be a producer of threat intelligence, which I'm sure threat intelligence is on our list of strategies of something we want to do at some point. And already then we can bleed from awareness into process optimization, into operations, IT land, IT operations, ITIL, and potentially into future strategic builds of security automation and orchestration, and also threat intelligence as a producer, not just a consumer. And we can start to build out this wider spider's web from all of a sudden, all we wanted to do was protect the organization from phishing emails. but actually we're starting to build coherent business cases, coherent strategies, coherent plans for how our maturity can build and build and build and get us further and further forward in what we want to achieve. And then we can think about, well, we could actually start to think about metrics in this space as well. So what's the relationship between people reporting versus our security team getting there first and actually finding things within people's mailboxes when we become aware of a threat from the amazing threat intelligence that we pick up, or we just read the things like Dynamo blog and get something really useful and actually use that every morning to try and find something within people's inboxes. So are people able to report before we spot them, or can we spot them before the users? But also then, what time does it take us to run the investigation? What time does it take us to remediate? Well, of course, if our users are reporting really quickly, then it takes us an absolute age to do what we need to do because the overhead on the security team is too great. You start building a business case for more people, or you start building a case for process optimization to reduce the overhead. You start being able to measure meaningful metrics when it comes to preparedness. Our preparedness isn't how many phishing simulations did we click on this week. It's whether actually, can we deal with things when it really matters? Can we proactively go and find things in users' inboxes based on threat intelligence? Can we react to our users reporting things to our security teams and lead an effective and timely investigation and remediation outcome that reduces risk to the organization? And if we can measure that in terms of how that manifests, how often it manifests, and our effectiveness in doing it, and finding where our dwell and process gaps are, we can start to deliver meaningful metrics that allow us to look at areas to improve and measure the improvement to our security operations, as an example. And also use meaningful risk metrics when it comes to making risk decisions, which shouldn't be beyond the wit of man, but appears to be when it comes to a lot of organizations. And also, kind of the one vital thing that almost always gets lost in this is a feedback loop to the user. So, of course, the result of everything that we want to do, we always want to go back to the user and inform them what happened. Because the worst thing that we can possibly do is get users to report things to us and never ever go back to them and tell them what happened as a result of it, because why the hell should they do it a second time? If it just disappears into a black box, A, we start to lose the engagement with users, and B, we lose a potential touch point with the user to educate. If they're reporting spam to us, we can start to educate them on the difference between spam and phishing. If they make the right decision and report something that is potentially phishing, a potentially malicious email to us, and we can take an action, let's go and reward them. Let's go and touch them. Let's go and talk to them. Let's go and praise them. Let's go and show that we're a caring, sharing security team, and maybe people will start engaging with us more and more and more because we're human beings and we're just trying to do a good job. And then when you look at all those different things that I've just absolutely whistle-stopped through there, how much of that can you directly control? And how much of that can you influence? And where do you need to beg, steal, or borrow to make a meaningful impact at one of the stages in that process flow all the way through from raising awareness about phishing emails through to enacting and purging them from a mailbox before users interact with them, and enhancing our controls related to the IOCs that you've picked up, and also sharing that as threat intelligence with other partners? What can we actually do today? What do we need to involve suppliers or other teams in? Are we able to do that in an effective way, and can we do it better? Now, remember, this is all just one initiative within awareness. So imagine the possibilities if we did this with everything. And if you think in a goal-orientated way, then you can spider into all sorts of areas. And then if you look at that, you can spider into them for a reason, because there are clear touch points between them. And you can start to see these knock-on effects. You can start to see these dependencies, and you can start to see the building blocks and links. And each component, or dot, if you're joining the dots, when it spiders off, before you know it, you'll have multiple junction points, multiple dots that feed into several different areas, which will tell you they're really important things. They're key stages and key dots within your organization. And those are the things that you really need to be good at, and the things that they initially touch, that they receive from and put out to, because that's where their key dependencies and outcomes are. And that's areas where you can really start to push outwards from each of those central dots that are really, really important and really heavy usage, and actually start to build the things around them to make them better and better and slicker and slicker. But only by kind of thinking in a more strategic way, in a more linear way, and looking at these kind of linkages and joins, can we really define actual maturity uplifts? And that's not to say they're all easy. That's not by any way stretch of the imagination, but you can start to see benefits and a rationale of aiming towards them. And why? And you're in a much more coherent space if you're able to first see the dots and see the linkage between these different aspects of what you do on a daily basis, and then join them. And not just at singular initiative level, but actually at goal level. You can start to look at wider goals and also how they feed into other areas of the business that you interact with on a daily basis. There's something more here about just identifying and visualizing and understanding pathways and properly linking them to develop a coherent picture across your organization. Now, one thing that will really jump out here is relationships. Relationships are so important. You can basically just go out and spend on technology and hope for the best. And you can try to follow these pathways effectively and drive maintainable change. But to do the latter requires a heavy investment in relationships. And that might seem a bit weird, but yes, relationships. Hopefully I've articulated a little bit, albeit maybe sporadically, that a hell of a lot of security, both what you do today or might do differently tomorrow, actually sits outside of security or relies heavily on things outside of security. Now, and even more so when you look beyond this simple example and factor in things like users and privileges and assets, hard, soft, virtual, and the absolute myriad others. Don't even start unpatching and how much of that might even actually be yours and how much of it might rely on many other people and teams across your organization. And when there's other teams and other people and potentially conflicting priorities, regardless that they're not in your direct control, so what you have to do is foster an ability to exert some influence or control, and that's done through relationships. At an individual, at a team, people, and process relationships. And it doesn't come easy. And often these teams are not focused on security. Believe it or not, they don't live your world every hour of every single day or at all. Be cognizant of who they are. Listen, engage as a human, and build a relationship. The approach to identifying these pathways and dependencies and teams and processes and relationships will help in bridging gaps in your effectiveness today. It's about clarity and honesty and taking the time to understand and think wider, building a picture, and through this identifying where there are gaps or weak components and areas for improvement. Maybe some kind of roadmap, who knows? Much of which is going to be free. It's not going to be a technological fix. It's not going to be a panacea. The predominant cost will be time and effort. And taking that step forward and being the human being and giving as much as receiving. Think of bridging like drawing a line between two dots. The picture's not complete if there's gaps between some of the dots. The lines may not be bold from day one, they might be pencil, they might be dotted lines, but some linkage is better than none. And it starts with finding the dots in the first place. So when you're looking to bridge these gaps between teams, or if just alpha techie banging heads against other teams, including suppliers, it can be really, really, really easy to fall into a cycle of distrust and conflict. Easy, without even trying, especially if you're alpha techies. It just happens in seconds. When you're only looking at your perspective or your need, it rarely achieves much other than the occasional fleeting win when you're proving them wrong, getting one over on them. Basically getting some success at their outcome, at their expense, which kind of makes your thing move better a little bit, but then also drives a team that doesn't like you and therefore will be a blocker to you in the future, especially when you need it. What's the point? What we also need to do here is change behavior, which can be really difficult sometimes for security teams. It can be very difficult for technology teams in general and technologists. What we need to do is encourage teams, individuals, and yourself to reach out and take the first step in understanding what these other teams are all about, what their drivers are, their overheads, their blockages, their culture, their ethos. Take the first step towards empathy. You'll all have roles to play in the success of the organization you work for and supply to. Take that step. Help yourselves to understand how you can make interaction more empathetic. more collaborative, and common understanding with other people's purposes. Where you have conflict or blockers, how often do you work towards making that mutual concession, or even conceding ground to make their work lives easier? Not yours, theirs. Take the first step, offer the hand of collaboration. It's honestly far more beneficial in the long run. And in that way, kind of a mutual culture is born. It means to build relationships, streamline processes, join these dots and take a dotted line into a full, thick, bold line, or remove a dot altogether and go straight between the two. Overcome blockages. Moreover, demonstrate to other teams how by taking that step and being the conciliatory team, being the team that reaches out first, you can work towards a more fruitful engagement and ultimately success, mutual success. Time spent building relationships, developing an understanding of other teams and encouraging a culture of communication will be time far better spent than on angst or conflict or just on technology in isolation. As a leader, it's absolutely imperative that you demonstrate the behaviours, both to your team and to theirs. And as team members, don't be afraid to take the step as well. Sometimes, your leadership might not see it, and you recognise that you have a dependency, a dwell, because of this lack of interaction or relationship between teams, between two dots in the overall picture. Don't be scared to reach out yourself and start to make that happen and start to build that relationship. It doesn't happen overnight, nor does the ultimate success, but start along the path. I've been guilty of falling into the conflict trap on many, many occasions, sometimes just down to a dislike of an individual person. And I can honestly say all it's done is waste time and energy. I might have felt good once by beating them in a meeting and getting one over them, and honestly, it achieved nothing. My best successes came from actually making mutual concessions with suppliers as well, who made money off my concessions, but it actually meant that I'd achieved a better outcome and I got a better relationship with them. Not even meeting halfway sometimes, but building relationships and building trust and relationships that continue to thrive, making incremental gains in what I wanted to achieve and forging alliances with other people who would then help fight my corner when it came to other bridges and other gaps. And this has been where the good shit gets done. Recognizing these dots and starting to actually build between them. And none of this is technology driven. This is me building relationships and being a human being and being conciliatory and conceding ground and actually wanting to work with people. Sometimes you've got to concede 100% to someone else's way of working. It's just how it is. But if it gets things moving and improves what you can do today, then do it. Don't be afraid to give ground. You can work on it as a build for a relationship. And they'll see you as wanting to work with them, not independently or against them. And it all starts with you making that first step to conciliation. Don't wait for someone else to take it, because you're going to be waiting forever and it's going to achieve nothing. Put simply, we'll change by thinking differently, by approaching things differently. And it's why I talk about things like horizontal thinking, joining the dots, linear, just to illustrate how things join in this fashion against the backdrop of an industry that drives us towards vertical thinking, that drives us towards silos and magic quadrants and waves and stuff that doesn't join up. And of course, it aims to make us believe that our problems are irreducibly complex. And we can't possibly solve these problems without faith in a vendor or a consultancy, an MSP, whoever, thought leader. Whereas actually they're not irreducibly complex. No matter how much you're told about sophistication, legacy, debt, whatever it happens to be, you can break things down into understandable components from which you can then start to build out a spider's web of knowledge of that component and how all the things are joined to it in these linear pathways. And if you can do that, then you can improve on some of these things gradually and you'll get better. And you'll get better in meaningful ways. But always try to build upon an overall view. It's bloody hard, but even at a local level, you can improve. Whether that's your daily processes or building relationships with dependent teams, your overall strategy, your adversarial understanding, none of it happens overnight. Most of all, though, think differently. Don't just do what industry pushes you to do. Don't be that person who says, where are you on the quadrant? Be someone that looks and kind of says, if I'm making a technological investment, what are the dominoes either side of it or all around it that need to actually be in place and need to work well for that technology to have a material impact? And to ensure that technology doesn't drift from where it is today at implementation as an effective control or effective in whatever way to somewhere in the future where, frankly, it does bugger all for me. To do all of that, you need to approach things in a different way. And that's what I'm talking about, horizontal thinking. That's what I'm talking about, joining the dots to cybersecurity. Adversaries are getting more sophisticated. Whoopie-doo, so's technology. In fact, it has done what I've been waffling on to you right now. The tools at their disposal, their awareness, their abilities, it's all the same. The same can be said for defenders. Yeah. Adversaries, though, are not held back by overarching legacy that we in security often inherit, or the silos that we create and maintain beautifully for ourselves. There's no quick fix, there's no magic bullet, there's no fifth generation cyber widget that will solve our ills. There is incremental and well thought out change that leads to improvements, and improvements that mean something in our spider's web of actually effective security. It's that change in focus and mindset and operation that makes a difference. And we can use things existing within our organization to our advantage to accelerate change. Things like if you've got digital transformation programs, but the main thing in there is you have to be able to articulate things well. You have to be able to identify all these different parts, whether it's linear parts of one particular problem, and actually articulate them to other people, whether it's other teams, to process owners, to investment boards, to business cases, to actually build up the design of how we join these dots in a much better, much streamlined and slicker manner to operate that overall process in a better way and achieve an actual goal. If we join all of our dots, we might just build a picture of achievable maturity and have the ability to articulate it properly and set out the steps required to go there. Give it a go. Generally, it can't be any worse than what we do today. And that generally is it. Thanks. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense.
You nailed that. You had 5 minutes to go as well, and no swearing. Look at that. I was impressed.
I think I said shit once.
Twice, technically.
I think Ed's testimony there was really a point about people. At the end of the day, it's all about people. It can always only ever be about people, and that's the only way you're going to get things done, right?
There's a reason why it's people, process, technology in that order.
Yeah.
People and process. You look at, as I say, you just look at kind of, I want to make my people aware of phishing emails so that they'll hopefully be able to spot them, report them, and we'll do something meaningful and actually protect the organisation. How much of that is technology, and how much of that is people and process? I'll give you a clue. 90% of it's people and process.
Yeah. When you rely on technology to do it as well, and you haven't got the people and process, it's when things start to go seriously wrong anyway. And usually people don't have the processes to manage the technology if they haven't got that in place. So it all falls apart, right? House of cards.
It does, which is why we use 5% of what we buy, and why kind of we might implement things, in absolute perfect state on day one, and within a year they've drifted into God knows what because we've not understood the processes that run around them.
Yeah, and for years,
like change management.
Yeah, and for years you'd hear this notion, horrible notion, I hate it, that people are the soft underbelly of the organisation. What a fucking terrible thought. Actually, people are your frontline defenders of your organisation. Yeah, they're the people at the front line that are going to actually stand in the way of you as a business and a devastating attack. Yeah,
absolutely. And also, it's not just those people there, but then, your next line is also people, because that's either your awareness teams who are trying to drive awareness to those end users, or it's your operations team who are going to actually deal with things, or it's your risk management teams, and it's all people. It's all people that need to be effective in what they do, but they all need to be effective at each step, and they can't be effective in isolation because actually it doesn't work. If I've got two effective people here that aren't joined up, then actually are they really being effective?
Yeah. So notionally, we could never argue that people within the organisation or people generally are the weakest link. People are actually the strongest link.
I would probably say that we enable people to be weaker links than they should be, because we don't create the links.
Yeah. So in fact, we disable people.
Yeah, in a sense, yes.
People should be your first line of defence, basically. Really, in that sense.
They should be, but if you think kind of if we talk about people being a link, then there needs to be something for it to link to.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't link to it, then is it even a link?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that makes the link to something else. You think about a chain, that's why we talk about chains and why we talk about links and linkages. And yet, when it comes to actually doing stuff in cyber, we never think about links.
Yeah.
it just, and we don't move forward.
Okay. Thanks, Ed. Really spirited testimony. You're a great guy, and I hope you get some work sorted out soon.
Cheers. Cheers. If you want to give me a job.
Well, you fucking deserve it. Stu's there, got the phone at his ear.
Actually, I need to speak to you anyway. So yeah, we'll do that Monday. Yeah, tomorrow.
Yeah, right, mate.
All over. All right, cheers, mate.
I'll hand off MC duties for a little while over to Stu. Stu is going to introduce Tanya Janser, who's going to be giving a keynote speech on the Blue Team track. So, Stu, over to you, mate.
Thank you very much. I just wait for Tanya. Are we still live? I don't know.
We can cut.